Kia ora tātou katoa. In Pakistan, during the 30 days of Ramadan, when Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset, many Christians join them, concurrently fasting for Lent. The Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Catholic tradition, called a black fast, is not dissimilar to Ramadan, with a meal only allowed after sunset, and then restrictions on luxury foods like meat, eggs, sweets, and the like. Although there is plenty of evidence that the early Jewish communities, including early Jesus groups, practiced fasting, it was not until the 4th century that it became what we might call a thing. The thing being instituting the practice of abstinence in the 40 days from Ash Wednesday to Maundy Thursday. Abstinence was, in theory, not to be thought of as a great burden to weigh you down, but as a preparatory discipline to aid your prayer. Imagine several of us, maybe first inspired by World Vision's marketing campaign, have tried voluntary fasting, and maybe for longer than 40 hours. I can certainly remember in my distant devout past living only on water for 3 or more days. Once over the hurdle of a complaining, rumbling tummy, I was pleasantly surprised how the desire for food waned and my sensory perception sharpened. Not unlike, I suppose, some of the detox therapies on offer today. And fasting at its best, and Lent at its best, are about detoxing our hearts and souls. Something akin to a holiday or a retreat that takes you right out of your usual places, routines, diets, and worries, and deeply rejuvenates you. On returning, your problems might not be solved, and your inbox might be full, but somehow the weight on your shoulders feels a little lighter, and the air and the sun seem a little brighter. Good religion helps this happen. It helps people live healthier, more fulfilling lives. Bad religion puts more weight on your shoulders and tells you that this is God's will. When a good idea is instituted, there is always a danger that it will become an institution. And institutions almost invariably over time can be corrupted or corrupted in part by the wealthy and powerful. And so it was with Lent. People wanted an exemption for special occasions. So the church authorities, in their mercy and their watching of the bottom line, put a price on such exemptions, called dispensations, a price that only really the rich could afford. So even though the church said, "Thou shalt not eat a nice succulent sausage in Lent," if you were rich enough to slip the church some money, you had a ticket out. Like if you paid God's representatives enough, God would pretend to look the other way. Really? Like you could barter with God. You sure? And like God had one set of rules for the rich and one set of rules for everyone else. Yeah, we can all believe that. In the 1500s, the issues around fasting were one of the grievances in the powder keg that would explode into the Protestant Reformation. Not that the Swiss Reformation was particularly explosive. Some might say with more people able to read, with the advanced technology called the printing press disseminating such radical literature as biblical texts, with the government wanting more patriotic, participatory styles of governance, even horror of horrors in the church, Reformation was somewhat inevitable. Well, let me tell you about a protest. The time, the afternoon of March the 9th, 1552, the first Sunday of Lent. And the crime scene, the Zurich workshop of Christos and Elise Froscher. Printers, biblical tracts and other things. In fact, they did all the printing for the canton of Zurich. They were artisans, not poor, not rich, but not wanting to pay for a dispensation to eat meat. And the crime, the crime was eating a sausage. Well, 2 smoked sausages actually, cut up, and a piece eaten by each of the dissenters. Who were the dissenters, you may ask? Well, along with Christophe and Elise, there was Hans, a tailor, Lorenz, a weaver, Nicholas, a shoemaker, and Heinrich, a baker. Sounds a bit like a joke, doesn't it? Well, they were all reforming hotheads. The powers that be, whether in the 16th century or today, likes to denigrate the validity of their opponents' arguments, not by addressing those arguments directly, but by calling names. So be it hotheads, renter mob, communists, socialists, fascists. Same old, same old. Also present with the dissenters, though not partaking of the succulent sausages, were 2 Catholic priests, Ulrich Zwingli and Leo Judd, Zwingli's mate. You see, the sausage eaters meant to get caught. They meant for people to know what they'd done. They knew they'd be thrown in prison. They knew they wanted to provoke not just the church, but the town authorities and the town citizens. And they knew that Zwingli, not being in prison, would have the freedom to articulate their defense from the pulpit of Grossmünster. Yes, that monastery church, beautiful church, in downtown Zurich, where Zwingli was the preacher. And 2 weeks later, he did precisely that. I smiled when I read the 2 weeks bit. So different from the world of today, where a protest event needs to get its press release out, explaining its actions within 2 hours. Within 2 weeks, all would be forgotten. Zwingli argued that fasting serves a valuable purpose, especially for disciplining the desires. But there is no biblical basis for making fasting legally obligatory for all. Zwingli wrote, abstinence from meat and drink is an old custom, which, however, later by the wickedness, don't we love that word, wickedness of some of the clergy, came to be viewed as a command. Note that you could interpret that sentence as Zwingli calling his bishop wicked, which the bishop did. One Hugo von Hollandenburg, who reacted in the predictable and ineffectual manner of authoritarian bishops by banning such teaching. Too late, Hugo. There's a thing now called a printing press. Zwingli could be misunderstood today as a libertarian. If there is no biblical basis for making something obligatory, then it's up to the individual to choose. Free choice, yay. And all that. And it would be a misunderstanding of Zwingli to pigeonhole him as an anti-authoritarian anarchist, turfing the mighty off their thrones and supplanting them with the humble and meek. He was no Magnificat Mary. As Reformation historian Daniel Owings notes, for Zwingli the gospel was not freedom from the law per se, but freedom from human laws claiming divine authority. Laws are useful, necessary things. But when religious authorities, without reference to Scripture, justified laws by claiming them to be mandated by God, making obedience to law into an idol, well, that got Zwingli's goat. Which is always the danger for us in the religion business, that we will, by intention or not, dress our opinion up in the guise of God's will, with reference to the Bible or not, and expect that to carry the day. There's a long history of people dressing up their opinions in the guise of God's will. Zwingli also reflected on Paul's thoughts in 1 Corinthians 8 and 10 on sausages sacrificed to idols. I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. You see, for Zwingli, freedom from obligation is only the first step. And the necessary next step is to reflect on whether one's actions could offend or injure others. The freedom of the Christian, and here Zwingli echoed Luther, was found in Christian love, not merely liberation from laws and regulations. We are free to do whatever we want, or whatever we think is most beneficial to us. But we're not free to do it unless it is compassionate towards others. Scripture compels us to love our neighbours. That is, to be compassionate, or even especially those who are other, different, vulnerable, Samaritan. And compassion is something that will cost us in time, money, and reputation. Disobeying laws dressed up in religiously authoritative drag by ecclesial institutions does not exempt us from obeying laws and obeying that which is not legislated, to do the good, the most we can, for the well-being of others, and so embody the injunction and ethic in our second reading today from Mark 10:35, of service to the least. Now, this issue of freedom, obligation, and compulsion is not just one of the past. During the recent COVID epidemic, we were compelled by law to wear masks. To have made mask wearing optional, to have made masks a matter of individual choice, like they are at present, would not have averted the public health crisis that was very real overseas and threatened to replicate here. I imagine Zwingli would have been very critical of those who used their Christianity to justify non-compliance. The law did not compel us to be vaccinated, only strongly encouraged us. Encouragement was the overriding health department strategy. But there were also consequences put in place for those who did not vaccinate. Again, I could imagine Zwingli thundering from the pulpit that our faith compels us to do what is most beneficial for the vulnerable, rather than be guided by our personal preference or anti-authoritarian leanings or whatever. Modern governance, whether of state or church, is very aware of this balance between freedom of choice, obligation, and compulsion, and the cultures and leanings of the populace. What we in New Zealand tolerated, resulting in comparatively few deaths, would not have been tolerated in the USA with its strong resistance to thinking of, planning, and acting in the best interests of the common good. Well, 3 weeks after Zwingli preached his justification of the actions of the sausage eaters, Christoph and Elise, now out of jail, made copies of the sermon available throughout the city. Zurich erupted. Fights broke out in taverns between Zwingli's fans and opponents. A rumour circulated that fanatics wanted to kidnap him and drag him off before old Hugo's court in Constance. Hugo did send Bishop Hugo did send a delegation to find out what was going on, and Zwingli sat at the negotiating table as an equal partner and instigator of this reform movement, alongside the local magistrate, Marco Rust, whose support Zwingli had obtained. Christoph, however, who was responsible for all the government printing, apologized for his indiscretion, probably crossing his fingers behind his back. But the affair of the sausages didn't do him any harm either, publishing a few years later the first complete Reformation Bible. 1 year after the gathering in the printing workshop for a sausage, all fasting is abolished, compulsory fasting abolished in Zurich. The canton's governing body thus not only followed Zwingli's interpretation of the Bible, but at the same time broke with the tradition of the Catholic Church. The Swiss Reformation had begun. Vive la sausage. Blessings.